There is a silence that feels like rest, and there is a silence that feels like rejection. Most people never learn the difference, and that's why they keep running from empty rooms, running from quiet evenings, running from themselves. They say, "I hate being alone," but what they really mean is, "I hate how lonely I feel." And those two are not the same. Being alone is a physical state. Feeling lonely is a psychological experience. You can be alone and feel peaceful. You can be surrounded and feel invisible. That's the part no one teaches you. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." Read that again. Loneliness is not about numbers. It's about not being met where it matters. That's why some people sit quietly by themselves and feel grounded, calm, whole, and others sit in crowded rooms and feel a heavy ache in their chest they can't explain. Psychology defines loneliness as the perceived gap between the connection you want and the connection you have. Not absence, mismatch. You're not lonely because no one is there. You're lonely because no one arrives emotionally. And that pain goes deeper than people admit. Because loneliness feels personal. It whispers, "Something is wrong with you." But most of the time, nothing is wrong. You were just never taught the difference between solitude and abandonment. Being alone can be chosen. Loneliness is usually imposed. Solitude says, "I am safe with myself." Loneliness says, "No one is safe with me." And the brain reacts very differently to both. Neuroscience shows that chronic loneliness activates the same regions as physical pain. Your nervous system treats emotional disconnection like a threat. That's why loneliness doesn't just feel sad, it feels heavy, tight, anxious. You overthink messages, you replay conversations, you wonder why no one checks on you the way you check on them. And slowly, quietly, you start questioning your worth. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." Loneliness often isn't about what's happening now, it's about the future you imagined. Someone understanding you without explanation, someone staying without conditions, someone choosing depth over convenience. And when reality doesn't match that image, the gap hurts. So people try to fix loneliness the wrong way. They add noise, they stay busy, they keep conversations going even when they feel empty. They avoid quiet because quiet feels like proof. But loneliness doesn't disappear when you add people, it disappears when you add meaning. That's why being alone can sometimes feel better than being with the wrong company. Because fake connection drains you, real solitude restores you. The psychologist Donald Winnicott talked about the capacity to be alone as a sign of emotional health. Not isolation, not withdrawal, but the ability to sit with yourself without panic. If being alone immediately feels unbearable, it's often because loneliness is already living inside. People who confuse loneliness with aloneness are always chasing something external to fix an internal ache. And society encourages that confusion. It tells you, if you're alone, you're failing. If you're single, you're behind. If you're quiet, something is wrong. But philosophers knew better. Friedrich Nietzsche warned, "The individual has always had to struggle from keeping from being overwhelmed by the tribe." Sometimes stepping away is not loneliness, it's protection. The real problem begins when people fear being alone so much that they tolerate being lonely. They stay in conversations that don't hear them, relationships that don't see them, spaces where they perform instead of exist. And that kind of loneliness is the most damaging, because it teaches you to abandon yourself to avoid being alone. Psychologically, that creates a split. You're present physically, but absent emotionally. And that absence builds quietly. You laugh when expected. You agree when unsure. You downplay what matters to you, until one day you realize, I'm surrounded, but I feel unseen. That's loneliness. Being alone never asked you to disappear. Loneliness did. And until you learn to tell them apart, you'll keep running from the very space that could heal you. Silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's an invitation to meet yourself without an audience, without explanation, without performance. And that's where the real difference begins. Solitude doesn't change you. It reveals you. That's why some people grow calmer when they're alone, and others fall apart. The difference isn't strength, it's relationship with the self. Most people fear being alone not because they hate silence, but because silence removes distraction. And without distraction, the mind speaks. Thoughts you buried rise up. Feelings you postponed knock again. Questions you avoided finally demand answers. That moment feels dangerous to people who learn to survive by staying busy. But philosophers always knew this truth. Silence is not empty, it's honest. The psychologist Donald Winnicott believed that the ability to be alone is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity. Because when you can sit with yourself without panic, it means your nervous system doesn't depend on external validation to feel safe. You don't disappear when no one is watching. That's powerful. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." People who fear solitude are easily commanded by opinions, expectations, attention, approval. Solitude interrupts that. When you're alone, something strange happens. You stop performing. No explaining, no adjusting, no managing impressions. Your nervous system finally rests. Psychologically, solitude allows emotional regulation to reset. The brain integrates experiences instead of reacting to them. This is why clarity often comes when you step back. Solitude sharpens intuition, not because it gives answers, but because it removes noise. But here's the part people misunderstand. Solitude only heals when it is chosen. Forced isolation is not solitude, that's abandonment. Chosen solitude says, I'm here with myself. Isolation says, no one else is here for me. The same room, two completely different experiences. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Love your solitude and try to sing out with the pain it causes you. Because solitude doesn't numb pain. It teaches you how to sit with it without running." People who grow stronger in solitude are not emotionally numb. They are emotionally present. They don't rush to escape discomfort. They stay long enough to understand it. This is where self-trust is built. You learn what drains you, what excites you, what feels heavy for a reason, what feels heavy because it isn't yours. Solitude is where people stop outsourcing their worth. They no longer need constant replies to feel valued. They no longer panic at silence. They no longer interpret distance as rejection. They become internally anchored. That doesn't mean they don't want connection. It means they don't beg for it. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, believed that self-acceptance is the foundation of healthy relationships. Because when you abandon yourself, you accept crumbs from others. Solitude teaches you the difference between being alone and being unavailable to yourself. And this is why solitude breaks some people, because if you were only ever loved for what you provided, only valued for how useful you were, only noticed when you performed, then silence feels like erasure. Your identity was built externally, so when no one reflects you back, you feel like you vanish. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. Many people learned early that attention equals safety, so being alone triggers old survival fears. If I'm not needed, I'm nothing. If I'm not chosen, I don't exist. Solitude brings those beliefs to the surface, and that's uncomfortable, but discomfort doesn't mean damage, it means growth is trying to happen. Solitude asks a hard question: who are you when no one is watching? And most people have never answered that honestly.
So they avoid the question entirely. They fill time, they fill space, they fill silence. But strength is built in the opposite direction. Strength grows when you stay, when you don't immediately distract, when you let the mind settle, when you don't judge every feeling that appears. This is why monks, philosophers, writers, and thinkers have always respected solitude, not because they hated people, but because they understood themselves first. Solitude creates boundaries without hostility. You stop chasing energy that doesn't match you. You stop forcing connections that feel heavy. You stop explaining your worth. You become selective, not cold, not distant, just clear. And clarity looks like confidence to people who live in noise. The paradox is this: the more comfortable you become alone, the healthier your connections become. Because you no longer use people to escape yourself. You choose them. And that's why solitude makes some people stronger. Not because they needed no one, but because they finally stopped needing everyone.
Loneliness is not quiet. It's loud inside the chest. It doesn't arrive with silence. It arrives with noise. Voices around you, laughter near you, people talking at you. Yet somewhere deep inside, something feels untouched. That's the cruelty of loneliness. You can be surrounded and still feel like no one is with you. Because loneliness is not about presence, it's about absence of attunement. The psychologist Erich Fromm once said, "The deepest need of the human being is the need to overcome separateness." Loneliness is the pain of separateness. Not physical separation, emotional separation, when no one meets your inner world. Modern society confuses interaction with connection, exposure with intimacy, attention with care. But being known is not the same as being seen. You can share stories without sharing yourself. You can talk all day without being understood. And that's why loneliness often hurts more after social interaction. The contrast becomes sharper. You return home and feel heavier than before, not because you were alone, but because you were unseen in company. Psychologists explain this as relational mismatch. Your nervous system is seeking safety, resonance, recognition, but it keeps receiving performance-based interaction instead. So it stays alert. That alertness feels like anxiety, restlessness, emptiness. Loneliness often develops in people who learn to be strong too early. Children who were praised for being independent. Teenagers who were told not to be sensitive. Adults who learned that needs make you inconvenient. So they adapted. They stopped asking. They stopped expecting. They stopped showing. And slowly they became emotionally invisible, even to themselves. The philosopher Martin Buber believed that real connection happens only in what he called I-thou relationships. Not I-it, not transactional, not functional. I-thou means meeting another person without agenda. Loneliness grows where relationships are conditional, where you are valued for what you provide, how you behave, how little trouble you cause. So you learn to shrink. You listen more than you speak. You give more than you receive. You adapt more than you express. And people call you easy to be around. But easy is not the same as close. Psychologically, loneliness creates hypervigilance. You start reading between lines, interpreting pauses, questioning tone. Not because you're insecure, but because connection feels unstable. Your nervous system stays alert for loss. And the cruel irony, loneliness convinces you that needing connection is weakness. So you hide the very thing that could heal you. Aristotle once said, "Man is by nature a social animal."
Needing connection is not failure, it's biology. Loneliness hurts because belonging is tied to survival. Your brain doesn't want popularity, it wants secure bonds. Someone who stays consistent, someone who recognizes your emotional language, someone who doesn't rush to fix you. That's why shallow connection makes loneliness worse. It reminds you of what's missing. And this is why people can feel lonelier in relationships than alone. When your emotional reality has no place to land, even love can feel isolating. Loneliness is not about being unwanted. It's about being unmatched. Your depth not being met, your pace not being respected, your silence not being understood. And over time, that mismatch exhausts the soul. People don't leave relationships because they want to be alone. They leave because they're tired of feeling lonely inside them. Loneliness doesn't ask for more people. It asks for fewer who actually see you, who sit with you without distraction, who hear what you don't say, who don't disappear when things get quiet. And until that kind of connection exists, even the loudest rooms will feel empty.
Loneliness is not a flaw. It's a signal, a message from the nervous system saying something important is missing. Most people treat loneliness like an enemy. They try to silence it, distract it, outrun it. But psychology teaches us something quieter and harder. What you resist persists. What you listen to transforms. Irvin Yalom, an existential psychologist, wrote, "The fear of isolation is at the core of human anxiety. Not isolation itself, the fear of it. Healing begins when you stop shaming that fear, because loneliness doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're human. The mistake is trying to heal loneliness by abandoning yourself, saying yes when you mean no, staying where you feel unseen, shrinking needs to keep people comfortable. That doesn't heal loneliness, it deepens it. Real healing starts internally, not by becoming emotionally independent, but by becoming emotionally present with yourself. Psychologists call this inner companionship, the way you speak to yourself, the way you respond to your own pain, the way you stay instead of disappearing. If you talk to yourself harshly, even perfect relationships won't feel safe, because loneliness is amplified by self-abandonment. The first relationship that needs repair is the one you have with your inner world. The philosopher Epictetus said, "First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." You cannot be deeply connected to others while being disconnected from yourself. So healing asks for courage, the courage to name your emotional language, to say, I need reassurance, I need consistency, I need depth, not as demands, but as truth. People cannot meet needs they don't know exist. Loneliness often survives because feelings stay unnamed. Another psychological shift is this: stop romanticizing emotional independence. Needing others does not make you weak. Pretending you don't need anyone makes you lonely. Secure people don't deny needs, they express them without shame. Healing also means choosing depth over availability. One emotionally safe person is more regulating than 10 distractions. Your nervous system doesn't want options, it wants reliability. Someone whose presence feels like rest, not anxiety, not guessing. And if that person doesn't exist yet, that doesn't mean you're behind. It means your nervous system is still learning discernment. Solitude becomes healing here, not as escape, but as training. Intentional time alone teaches you to notice what feels calming, what feels heavy, what feels like home. This awareness protects you from settling. The paradox is powerful. When you stop fearing being alone, you stop tolerating being lonely. You leave spaces where you feel invisible. You stop over-explaining yourself.
You stop chasing emotional availability, and slowly your standards change, not because you think you deserve more, but because your nervous system knows better now. The philosopher Simone Weil once wrote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." Healing loneliness isn't about being interesting, it's about being met with attention, and you must offer that to yourself first. Finally, understand this. Loneliness does not disappear overnight. It softens in layers. Each time you choose honesty over performance, each time you leave a conversation that drains you, each time you sit with yourself without judgment, you are teaching your nervous system something new. I am not alone, even when I am by myself. Being alone feels spacious. Feeling lonely feels tight. One expands your chest, the other constricts it. And once you truly feel the difference, you stop running from silence. You listen. Because sometimes the connection you were searching for in others begins with how deeply you stay with yourself.